This show broke me. I've been a Tolkien fan for well over 20 years. I remember seeing Two Towers and Return of the King in cinema as a young boy, but I don't really remember Fellowship because I was only 5 years old at the time. When I went and saw The Hobbit, I was in the minority of people that enjoyed the films, warts and all, although I could definitely agree that the movies had their issues, mainly the third movie being the Battle of the Five Armies, what with Legolas doing his silly elf shenanigans and the CGI noticeably dipping in quality and the movie being unable to decide on a consistent tone. But I loved all the movies, I loved the books and the films, and when I finally finished the Silmarillion, I was entranced and just wanted more of this world. Then along came Rings of Power. When it was first announced, there were already a slew of issues beginning with the most utterly retarded marketing I've ever seen. Rumours that it was going to be the next Game of Thrones, complete with gore, swearing, and titties galore. That rumour was quelled by the showrunners, thank goodness. But then shortly after, another rumour arose. This time, the rumour said there was going to be a massive time compression of well over 1,000 years of history, which sadly proved to be true. And just off in that distance, that far off distance, I could hear the Kill Bill sirens going off in my head. Then another rumour, this one being a retelling of the Second Age, complete with new characters exploring the origins of Gondor in the far-off realm of Numenor and the crafting of the Rings of Power. This rumour proved to be true, but no clear details were made. With all this hearsay and she said, he said rubbish going on, me, being the lowly peasant that I am, just wanted to know what the bloody show was going to be about, and who was going to be in it. But with security that rivaled the frigging Pentagon, complete with security guards and the scripts being hidden in a vault that required thumbprint access, I'm not kidding, that's what they actually did, nothing much was known until that trailer was released. Now, of great historical moments, most people ask, where were you when Neil Armstrong first stepped on the moon in 1969? Or when the Berlin Wall came down in 1989? Or when those truly haunting news clips show the Twin Towers being bombed on the horrific date of 9/11? But our generation asks a much more important question. Where were you when the Rings of Power trailer was released? I remember being in bed and watching this minute-long trailer with rather questionable narration skills and even more questionable and weird lines like, haven't you ever wondered what else is out there? There's wonders in this world, beyond our wondering.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
I don't know about you, but there's too many W's and wonders in that bloody sentence, and in that hilarious Irish accent said by an Australian actor, just makes it all the more comical. But yeah, that trailer was, ooh boy. The like to dislike ratio was more unbalanced than Rey Skywalker's power level, with over 1.9 million dislikes compared to 131,000 likes. In the words of Phil Swift,
now that's a lot of damage!
But I wanted to hold my judgment till I saw the actual show. Oh, but the marketing, oh my goodness, that marketing! Hey guys, let's release like 30 images of people's hands with absolutely no context so that people can meme the hell out of said images. Ooh, and then maybe show Guy Ladriel posing like a dude in full suit of armor in stark contrast to what we've seen in Peter Jackson's trilogy. Ooh, and maybe a bunch of other weird shots, like Elrond posing like a white boy version of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Ooh, and then, let's post a picture of the real Slim Shady and let people think it's Sauron so that people get really mad. Seriously, what even was the marketing for this show? Did they think any publicity was good publicity? I mean, yeah, you had 25 million people watch the first 2 episodes when they aired, but I think we can all safely assume that that number dripped exponentially. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So after a few more truly idiotic trailers that really failed to quell my concerns, I held on to the belief that the people making the show and the marketing department were two completely separate things, and that the show might still be good. But I still had my doubts, and to explain why, I had to give you a bit of context, however. So a few months prior to this show airing, we had the magnum opus that was Obi-Wan Kenobi air on Disney+. Now, I was like a kid at Christmas when that show was first announced. I was so unbelievably excited, as Obi-Wan had been my favourite Star Wars character for many, many years. Then, I was like a kid at Christmas that had just opened their first present, only to reveal a massive steaming turd in a box with a big middle finger pointing up at me. The show dashed my hopes and almost broke me, with its ridiculous plot contrivances, thoroughly unlikable characters. I'm looking at you, Reva, you constipated-looking plank of wood, and its absolute disregard for the show's titular character, turning this once beautiful, charismatic, intelligent bastion of strength, wit and civility, into a cowardly old moron who gets his ass absolutely handed to him. But despite all this, I held out hope for Rings of Power, saving my shattered dreams. I held on to the thought that The Lord of the Rings had remained somewhat untarnished, even with the misstep of The Hobbit. I thought Tolkien's works were safe from the nihilistic, political-fueled world we live in. Then, on September 1st, the show aired, and the social media war that had already been waging for a while truly begun, and the screams of horror truly commenced.
Oh my
Ugh. Now, I don't want to focus too much on the wokeness, or race-swapping, or total bastardization of Tolkien's works, because many people have said this crap already, and probably said it better than I, but I will touch on those things. The first two episodes, simply put, were bloody boring. Sweeping vistas and admittedly very beautiful CGI creations weren't enough to elevate these episodes out of the monotonous snowfest that it was. It is an absolutely gorgeous looking show, and for $1 billion you'd want to bloody hope so, but a gorgeous show does not an interesting watch make. A weird, confusing, rushed explanation at the beginning shows the War of Wrath and who Morgoth was, but neither are explained anywhere near enough, because the War of Wrath isn't even named, and Morgoth just looks like a big fart cloud that turned out the lights. So non-book fans were left confused as what the hell they were watching, and leaving book fans unfulfilled and far from satisfied, which, by the by, was my calling card in high school. Then 2 episodes of Galadriel doing stuff, which really can't be summed up any better than that. She scowls at people and speaks with discount Shakespeare dialogue, which makes her sound like a pretentious twat, and made me wonder, how does this person have the respect and love of her people when I've had blisters that were more likable than her? She also kills a troll basically single-handedly, which diffuses any tension the show might have had, and made me think of the troll we see in Moria and Fellowship, and how terrifying that thing was, and how the Fellowship barely were able to kill it, and if it wasn't for Frodo's mithril shirt, he would have died. But here, Galadriel just does some weird Mario jump off a sword and bops him on the head, and boom! Dead. Yeah, riveting stuff, Amazon. Thank you very much. Elrond didn't do much but write a cringy speech for High King Gil-galad and have a rock-smashing contest with Durin, which was as interesting as it sounds. He did have a nice moment with Durin the Fourth in the second episode, where their characters were somewhat fleshed out, but these moments were too far and few between. Now, Elrond did remain one of my favourite characters in this show, but he sadly kept getting sidelined, so he didn't get to do much, which really ruined my enjoyment of his scenes. Gil-galad, whose character was absolutely massacred, but I'll get to that later, does nothing but pose in his weird gouchy outfits and look vaguely pretty. Now, the only elf that is allowed to just stand around and look pretty is Legolas, because, let's face it, Orlando Bloom is 45 years old and still hotter than the fires of Mount Doom.
This boy is fueled like fire. So start melting, ladies, because the boy is hotter than hot. He's hot, hot.
You also had the Halfwits, doing their shenanigans, but quite frankly, I don't want to talk about them because I have nothing positive to say about those things. Their story is pointless, makes the Hobbits seem like vindictive murdering psychopaths, and the worst crime of all are just bloody boring. although the music for their scenes were quite nice, so kudos there. Now, I don't want to do a point-for-point summary of each episode, because otherwise this damn thing will go for a week. So I'll summarize by saying, nothing interesting happens in these first 2 episodes except some really cool visuals, but when you chuck $1 billion at something, you hope it wouldn't look like deep-fried butt cheeks. Now, I've seen shows start off far rockier than this and find their footing before the first season's finale. Sure as hell wasn't Citizen Kane, but it certainly wasn't Batwoman levels of terrible either. So I wasn't dismayed. In fact, I thought the groundwork had somewhat been set to really get the ball moving. So I ignored the criticism made by reviewers, friends, and YouTubers, and held to my belief that the show could still be good. Then the 3rd episode, Adar, dropped, and holy crap! My eyes were assaulted by the most hideous-looking CGI monstrosity that I have ever seen. And I've seen 4 of the Anaconda movies with their Fisher-Price-looking snakes that wouldn't even pass for a bloody N64 game. If you've seen the episode, you know what I'm talking about. That wog is the most hideous thing I have ever laid my eyes on, and it still haunts my dreams to this day. This episode also had this incredibly frustrating moment with the Queen of Numenor and Guy Ladriel that I'll touch on later. But this episode continued the trend of being utterly dull and only adding fuel to the fire of this show being a turd sandwich. But we did get to meet Elendil, who remained a constant highlight for me in this dark, depressing show. But sadly, every time he was on screen with a total bellend who ruined everything like a toenail in a salad. The small nitpicks, and colossal nitpicks, were mounting, and really causing me to lose faith. Guy Ladriel is even more of a prick than the thornbush I fell into the other day, and Durin's lady friend Disa had eyes that made me want to pull my own eyes out. Those freaky things had X-ray vision and Cyclops laser beam capabilities. If her and the Eye of Sauron had a stare-off, Barad-dûr would have crumbled before it was even built. Now, there were good moments that were keeping my interest afloat, like Elendil, who was perfectly casted, perfectly acted, and whose dialogue didn't sound like it came straight out of the Mortal Kombat movies. These were one of the reasons why I remained amongst the faithful. But for every good thing I found something equally aggravating. For example, Queen Muriel, who's probably amongst my second least favourite characters in the show. Queen Muriel, who's supposed to be Tar Muriel in the books, is supposed to be fairer than silver, or ivory, or pearls, but is portrayed by a stuck-up snooty bitch queen from hell. I was quickly running out of patience for this bloody show. Her stupid smirk, the way she held her arms limply to the side, the sound of her damn heels on the pavement. Everything about this woman annoyed me. Her pissing contest with Guy Ladriel almost made me want to put my head through the wall. But thankfully, Halbrand, who I hadn't mentioned till now, was there to save the day. His Han Solo attitude, I must admit, was infectious. His dialogue, thankfully, wasn't like nails on a chalkboard, and the guy just oozed charisma, which the show was sorely lacking. He was another character that I really enjoyed. Every time he was on screen, minus Galadriel, I just wanted to see more of him, because damn he can smile, and damn he runs rings around Galadriel, who supposedly is one of the greatest of the elves in Middle-earth, who surpassed nearly all others in beauty, knowledge, and power. But next to Halbrand, this interpretation of Galadriel couldn't hold a candle to him. So of course he turns out to be Sauron, which literally everybody calls from his first appearance on screen. So good work, Amazon, you can't write complexity to save yourself. I finished episode 3, I was really starting to get a case of the wobblies. But then, my friends, episode 4 was released, called The Great Wave. It had the highlight of the show in it. Now, the moment was totally unearned and not built up to even in the slightest, but it was beautifully acted, beautifully choreographed, and the music was perfect. A scene between Durin IV and Elrond, in which Durin curses and spits on his father's name, and Elrond, after mending their broken friendship, comes to him in his lowest moment. He tells Durin of his father, Eärendil, the mariner, who sailed to Valinor with his wife, Elwing, during the War of Wrath, to convince the Valar to revoke their curse on the elves and save them from Morgoth's wrath. How Elrond never saw his father again, and pondered if his father would be proud of him for all the things he accomplished, or be disappointed for not living up to the lofty legacy that his father had accomplished. Elrond concludes that he would gladly hear any judgment from his father, as long as he simply got to talk to his father one last time. This results in Durin IV going before his father and making amends for their argument that we never saw, and resolving their differences and finding forgiveness and compassion over adversity.
Nice.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is Tolkien, and it was beautifully done. And this scene made me forget all the woes this show was having and got me excited for the next week's episode. It also helped that this episode had no bloody halfwits, halfwits in it, which, again, I haven't mentioned much, but quite frankly, I have nothing positive to say about those psychopathic little troglodyte children of the corn munchkins. The bit where they read from the Book of the Dead, where they laugh about someone dying and calling them an idiot, really made me wonder, how the hell is Bilbo and Frodo Baggins, Samwise the Brave, and Merry and Pippin descended from these yahoos? But yeah, I'm not going to say much on them because the PTSD is still very real. But anyway, my hopes were high, and I eagerly awaited the 5th episode. And then it dropped. The 5th episode single-handedly turned me hostile against this show. All the goodwill it had stored from the previous episode was gone.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
And for this to be completely understood, we have to look at two things. Those two things being the concept of oaths in Tolkien's world, and High King Gil-galad. Beginning with oaths, oaths were not something to be made lightly in Tolkien's world, and I have two examples I'll use, one from the Silmarillion and one from the Lord of the Rings, so people who have just watched the movies will understand more clearly, and one for my homies who have read the novels. There was once a great elf called Fëanor. Fëanor was considered the greatest smith that had ever lived, and from his own hands he wrought the greatest jewels ever created, the Silmarils. Now the Silmarils were 3 gems that captured the light of the 2 trees that illuminated all over Valinor. So great was this feat that he couldn't do it a second time. So I guess, like Rick Astley, he was a bit of a one-hit wonder. But Melkor, later named Morgoth, the Great Foe, the first Dark Lord of Arda, who in the show looked like the big fart gas I mentioned earlier, coveted the Silmarils fiercely, and so he slew Fëanor's father Finwë, the High King of the Noldor, who was the race of elves that lived in Valinor, and stole them, which the show doesn't show, so a lot of the show doesn't make sense, but whatever. Fëanor made his sons swear an oath that whoever would withhold the Silmarils from them would be cruelly put to the sword. So great was this oath that it led to 3 kinslayings among the elves, and every single one of Fëanor's sons dying in truly tragic ways. They could not forsake this oath, because they swore it on the name of Eru Ilúvatar, or God in Tolkien's world, and so were bound to kill all who might withhold their father's gems from them. Oaths were a very, very big deal. And for another example, we look at the Oathbreakers, who casual fans will know as the Green Dead dudes who lived under the mountains of Dun Harrow in Return of the King, that Aragorn had to recruit to save Minas Tirith during the War of the Ring. Now, the Oathbreakers made an oath to Isildur, the total Chad from Fellowship of the Ring, and the total twink with an eating disorder from the Rings of Power, to come to his aid during the War of the Last Alliance. But they refused, and so Isildur cursed them to dwell in the caverns beneath the Duimaberg, until their oath was fulfilled. So for over an age they were waited and haunted the lands, and could never find rest, never find peace, until the descendant of Isildur called on them again and made them fulfill their oath. Oaths were a very, very serious thing in Tolkien's world, and you're probably wondering what this has to do with High King Gil-galad. Now, Gil-galad was just as old as Galadriel, and also a total Chad. He was the only elf to rule over every single elf in Middle-earth, and he was beloved by all elves, and even Sauron feared him. He ruled over all the elves in the Second Age from his kingdom of Lindon, and was one of the few people, along with Galadriel, Elrond, and in some sources Celebrimbor, who weren't fooled by Sauron in his fair guise as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. So yeah, total Chad. So, when I was watching episode 5 called Partings, and saw Gil-galad, High King Gil-galad, The chattiest of all chads, the utter giga chad to end all chads, command Elrond to break his oath because of some retarded, non-canon story about Mithril being created by an elf and a Balrog fighting over a Silmaril that was stuck in a tree and then getting struck by lightning. Oh my goodness, just writing this, I realized just how stupid this sounds! You can understand why I got very, very angry. They ruined one of my favorite Second Age characters and completely bollocksed up one of the defining traits of Tolkien's world in one fell swoop. Gil-galad was no longer the elf that had united elves and men in the War of the Last Alliance, and duelled with Sauron and died alongside Elendil, and wounded him so badly that Isildur was able to cut the ring from his hand. He was an oath-breaking, line-manipulative fool! And this episode had so much half-wit rubbish in it! I hate this episode! And I need to go make myself a cup of tea to calm down! Sorry about that. I've got me tea and I'm feeling all better now. Anyway, moving on to episode 6. Now, I'm skipping past vast quantities of this show, but I'm really only touching on the stuff that really irked me. And this episode had its fair share. I think everyone knows what I'm going to say. Did we really need Mordor, the origin story? And Pompeii? Pfft, lol. Those people who perished just weren't trying when they got hit in the face with a bloody pyroclastic surge that was travelling at speeds of 80 kilometers an hour. Or 50 miles per hour for all you American weirdos. And that's just a starting speed. These bad boys can reach up to 300 kilometers an hour, with a lovely balmy temperature ranging between 200 degrees Celsius and 700 degrees Celsius. And yet, all our characters just take this on the chin as if they got hit by a warm breeze like an intensely hot fart, rather than a destructive force that can't be rivaled on Earth. And all of you buttheads trying to defend this by saying, well, Frodo and Sam didn't die, and they were right next to the lava. That's the point! They were at least next to it! Peter Jackson wasn't stupid enough to let them get hit by it! Oh, gosh, I can't believe I had to stipulate that. And stop trying to bring down the perfection that is the Lord of the Rings trilogy to defend this catastrophe, because it just looks silly. Also, I don't know how I feel about full-on blood and dismemberment in the Lord of the Rings project. It just feels dirty, like splicing a scene from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre film into an episode of the Teletubbies. This episode had even more characters acting stupid and retarded, but I was beyond getting angry at that stuff because it was just happening every few minutes, and it just became numb to it. Then comes episode 7, The Eye, which I only saw last week as of writing this, and I can barely remember it because this show just gets so boring after this. I mean, nothing really happens that upsets me like before, but really, I'm just exhausted from this show. I have to go make a cup of tea every time something upsets me, which means I drink like 3 cups an episode. One bit from this episode was Galadriel's description of how she meets Celeborn, her husband, who is supposedly dead in the show, but can't be because they have a daughter called Celebrian who marries Elrond and gives birth to Arwen, who marries Aragorn. So yeah, high quality autism right there. What really irked me in this episode was the showrunners basically nicking how Beren and Luthien met, who Tolkien based their meeting off his own marriage, which just seemed really disrespectful. Beren was a mortal man, and Luthien was the most beautiful elf that ever walked the earth, and they met when Beren saw her dancing in a glade, and was smitten with her immediately. Now, Tolkien's wife, Edith, used to dance in a field for him, and Tolkien was so smitten that he based his greatest and most tragic love story on it. Even on their gravestones, Tolkien had inscribed Beren and Luthien on their shared tombstone, so that Beren and Luthien would never truly be apart. So, can you see why stealing that story for something else is kinda not cool? Yeah, nice one, Amazon. If you were trying to be respectful, it didn't work and just came off as offensive. Episode 8, Alloyed, was the final episode and had the forging of 3 of the Rings of Power in it. My thoughts going in, maybe they've saved all the best bits for this episode, and it's going to totally kick ass and end the show on a bang. Well, I don't even know anymore, guys. There were some cool visuals, but the actual forging of the 3 elven rings took like 15 minutes and felt very anticlimactic. There was some rubbish going on with Meteor Man and the Halfwits and the real Slim Shady, but the only thing worth noting from that crap was Meteor Man was all but confirmed to be Gandalf, which really buggers up the timeline, because he doesn't come over till the Third Age 1000 with the 4 other wizards. But honestly, I think Amazon has just stopped caring ages ago. Halbrand is revealed to be Sauron, surprise, surprise, lol, and Galadriel figures it out, completely out of the blue, even though there is absolutely nothing to go off. She just says, I wonder if someone in a 10-foot radius to me is Sauron, and lo and behold, she hits the nail on the head. There's some cool visuals with Halbrand looking evil, but he was kind of giving off Kylo Ren vibes, which I don't think was the plan, but YOLO, right? So they create 3 of the Rings of Power, even though the Elven Rings were made last, besides the One Ring, and the show ends with Halbrand/Sauron walking into Mordor. Ha! Take that, Boromir! I didn't like what the rings looked like, because they looked kind of cheap. But maybe that's just me, because some people said they liked them, but they looked thin and flimsy, but now I'm just nitpicking. This show was just a convoluted mess, filled with J.J. Abrams-style mystery boxes, of which I will never forgive him for giving that cursed speech on why mystery boxes are good. They work for Cloverfield and that's it! Now go away, J.J.! So many unlikable characters, of which there really aren't that many characters at all. More just cardboard cutouts of people doing random stuff, who act less human than the friggin' My Face is Tired chick from Mass Effect Andromeda. The only characters I could safely say I liked wholeheartedly were Elrond, Celebrimbor, and that was mainly down to Charles Edwards' phenomenal acting, Adar, and that's because he gave a big middle finger to Galadriel, so that was a win in my books. Durin the Fourth, who started off rather terribly with that truly retarded "the dog could bark at the moon, but he cannot bring it down" line. But he certainly got better as the series went on. Meteor Man, because he thankfully barely spoke, meaning no more stupid dialogue, but when he did, he had a beautiful British accent, which I always have a soft spot for. Elendil, who, if he doesn't get a bigger role in this dreaded upcoming Season 2, I'm going to hit someone! And Halbrand, who then became the Dark Lord of Middle-earth, so, not good. I also kind of liked Arondir, who I know I haven't mentioned much yet, but that's because he's just not that interesting. The guy scowls through every scene he is in, which is weird, because I've seen the actor in interviews, and he's got a great smile. It's like that time Will Smith, the most charismatic dude ever, did a movie where he's required to have no emotion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like 8 characters out of roughly 20 they introduced, which isn't exactly a plus, my dudes. The writing was trying its hardest to sound grandiose, but came off as a preteen trying to sound insightful, and made my brain exit my skull and my skin crawl more times than I cared to remember. All this combined with my newsfeed just being spammed with people damning the show or defending the show just made me feel really downcast, because before this travesty of a show came out, Lord of the Rings was perfect, and everyone agreed on that. There were some who tried to say Lord of the Rings wasn't actually that good, but that's okay, we don't listen to those people, they're wrong and I have no friends. This show really broke me. It really broke me, and it sucks, because I feel like the show had so much potential. And maybe they'll course correct for Season 2, although I highly doubt it, because whoever admits they're wrong these days. If I had to do the 5 seasons show, which they're planning on doing, I would have had the crafting of the Rings of Power take place over an entire season, all on its own, with the ending being the realization that Halbrand/Anatar is Sauron, and then the next season focusing on the war of Sauron and the Elves, all while having small snippets of Numenor starting faithful and slowly descending into depravity and chaos. Then the season after that can show a massive time jump and have Sauron re-emerge, and the entire season be Sauron causing havoc in Numenor, eventually ending with the downfall of Numenor, and then the next season being the construction of the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, and Sauron re-emerging again, which leads to the War of the Last Alliance. Had them be 12-episode seasons, roughly 45 to 60 minutes in length, and not jump around as much, because I got a freaking whiplash with the number of times this show jumped between its characters. I felt like I was watching a hyperactive kid who just had their 6th drink of fizzy pop. But anyway, like I said, all this has been said by other people, most likely much more coherently, but this was something I had to share, because Tolkien's work for me are very special. My father and I usually talk about how much we love the books, and we argue over little details because that's just who we are. I love the movies, the books, the few games that we've gotten, like the Lego games and Shadow of Mordor, although not Shadow of War, because that suffered from the same problem as Rings of Power of deviating too far from the source material. I mean, I was a little confused when they turned Shelob into a sexy MILF, but I was outright furious when they brought Celebrimbor back as a wraith to create a second one ring to combat Sauron's one ring. Guys, the whole point of there being one ring is the fact that there's one, and only one. Silly game. But my point is, I love Tolkien and his works, and this show was a huge middle finger to his legacy, and to the works that I hold so dearly to my heart. If the good Lord ever blesses me with children, these will be the books I read to them. This and the Narnia series, because I'm a sucker for the classics. That's all I had to say, and if you like the show, cool for you. Don't let my overly critical video affect your love of it. But go back and watch the Lord of the Rings movies, and just remember what true quality really is. Namarie.